Hi, everyone, and welcome to our other talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. This is the talk we do every third Sunday of the month, every month, and this is to accommodate those who are not able to join us at our usual time at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on every Saturday evening. So I'm one of your two hosts, Nora Kyle.
And I am the other one of your two hosts, Mushtaq Ali.
And we want to thank you for joining us this morning. I think we are going to be talking about some Enneagram stuff, so I know people get excited about that. We'll jump into that shortly. But first we have to do our spiel.
The Spiel.
Our favorite part of every session.
Yes. So, here's the Spiel. Subscribe to us, please. We would like it if you did. And also hit the like button on this video, because if you like us, then YouTube likes us. And if YouTube likes us, then they pass our videos around more often. So it would be wonderful if you did those two things. Subscribe to the video if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're watching this and you're here, you don't need to subscribe because you're already here. Oh my God, Board made it.
A good surprise. This is good.
He had sent me a note earlier saying that he couldn't make it. Anyway, back to the spiel. So the other thing that we would like is for you, if you're listening to this on YouTube, make a comment below. Tell us what you think about the art of verbal storytelling. Make suggestions, give comments, think about things. We'd love to hear from you. There are hundreds of you every week who watch this, and we don't know who most of you are, and we're curious. And we promise not to spam you like some other people. So there we have it. Oh, also, as you may have known, the world is in disaster. The economies are crashing right and left, including that here in the States. So this is a great time for anybody who would like to, who is not starving themselves, to make a donation to the Nine-Sided Circle. You'll find a link in the description below, and that will help us keep on going in doing this, because we love doing this, and unfortunately it costs money. So we're trying to raise a little bit at the moment. There we go. All done. Back to you, Noor.
Back to me! Yes. Scott was just saying I'm wearing my librarian look today, so I was responding to him and it went to everybody. But yes, today's our Two Talk Sundays, so I like to cut myself some slack and wear my new glasses on days like today.
Which are beautiful glasses.
Yeah, contacts all day is tough. Anyway, where were we? We did our spiel. Yes, we are so close to getting to 1,000. Every day we get a little bit closer, so anyone who's excited to subscribe or even just lukewarm about subscribing, please, please, please do it. It would be such a huge help to us. Thank you. Anyways, yes, today we are talking about something that we got asked about in one of our YouTube comments. Someone was asking about not just story, we often do tell stories here, but, you know, the art of storytelling. It really is an art. It is a craft. It is a skill. It can be learned and practiced, and we're going to be talking about that as well today. Yeah, this is an age-old tradition. It goes back basically from the start of being able to speak as you know, as the species that we are. And it has been an integral part of what makes us who and what we are over millennia. This goes back before writing, you know, before paper, before written communication and books and all that. This is oral transmission of knowledge, has been the primary way that we've communicated for hundreds of thousands of years. So much talk. What would you like to say about that?
Well, as you mentioned, storytelling is a craft. And as we've talked about before, a lot of Sufi groups have a craft that they specialize in, and ours does in fact specialize in storytelling. This is one of the traditional crafts of our tarika. And so that makes it a particular interest to us. And specifically oral storytelling, the storytelling of speech, which has a completely different power than the written word. And there are some things that make it work and make it work well. And there is a pattern to it that allows it to be effective in doing what it is meant to do, which is to keep balance within the community. And this is something that is universal from old Sufi storytellers to the bards of Celtic Ireland and Scotland to the skalds of Scandinavian countries. It makes me happy that Bord is here because he's sort of an expert on this kind of stuff from that tradition. And we find it even today in things like music. I'm sure that you've all noticed that the best songs tell stories. And they tell them in particular ways. And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to give you a model that you can use to help you begin to craft your oral stories. Now, you might say, oh my God, I would never be a storyteller. But of course you're a storyteller already. You just haven't noticed. Everybody tells stories. You're sitting with a friend and you're telling them about your life. You're telling them a story. You tell them about what you saw on TV last night and you're telling them a story. So you might as well understand the power of what you're doing. And that power, the power of what you're doing, is what we're talking about today. The power to speak a story in such a way that it has a tangible effect upon the community. Sound like fun? So, we didn't really have access to the written word until Gutenberg invented the printing press in 1440, thereabouts. And before that, books were rare because you had to write them by hand. And if you've ever written a book by hand, you know that it's hard work. Most of us never have because it's hard work. And so the tradition of passing knowledge was an oral one. And they always followed some patterns. Like in the mainland or main island Celtic tradition of the Druids, and Welsh in particular, they stored their knowledge in their mind in triplets. And I'm going to see if I can find an example of that for you.
You take a minute to look that up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you talk to people.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify that storytelling may not be hundreds of thousands of years old, but it is at least 50,000 years old. So before that, we were doing visual storytelling via cave paintings and such. But 50,000 years is quite a long time for us to have developed this art and really honed it to perfection. So it's certainly a huge part of foundation of the cultures that we've established since. And we don't even realize it yet. We use it all the time.
Yeah, and it's probably older than that. We
Yep.
don't know when when genus Homo developed speech. It's
Yeah.
somewhere between 200,000 years ago, well, 2 million years ago to 200,000 years ago.
Right. And at core, it's a performance art. So
Yeah.
there are many ways to convey a
Yeah.
story through action and presence and expression.
So I couldn't find a triplet from the Welsh tradition, but I know one from heart from the Sufi tradition or from the Islamic tradition. 3 people are guided to heaven by means of the same arrow. The one who made it, the one who shoots it, and the one who returns it to the shooter. There's an example of a triplet. Easy to remember. It has a particular rhythm to it. And in the Druidic tradition, they use this for memorization. Um, all things had to be held in memory. And in order to hold something in memory, it helps if it has a rhythmic pattern and a sense of the flow of it. So the Quran was delivered verbally. And one of its attributes is it's one long poem. If you listen to it, the words don't just flat say information. They say it in a very poetic way. So Al-Fatiha in Arabic, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Malik Yawmiddin, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in, Ihdina siratal mustaqim, siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim, ghayril maktubi alayhim waladdallin. You notice it has meter, it has rhyme, it has structure that allows it to be easily memorized. Where else would you find that for us English speakers? Any clues? Any thoughts? Epic poems. Yes. Not a whole lot of epic poems in English, unfortunately, but there is one, which is Hiawatha. And Hiawatha, Dr. Seuss, yes.
Yes, Aaron suggested epic poems, and Levita
Yeah,
suggests Dr. Seuss.
yeah.
Yes, very good.
Longfellow's poem Hiawatha is framed on the meter of the Kalevala, which is the Finnish epic poem. It's their history given in poem, and it has that same sort of rhyme and meter to it. And it's easy to remember. Dr. Seuss is a perfect example of that because I read Green Eggs and Ham probably when I was 8 years old, and I can still recite it from memory.
Kind of part of the cultural lexicon to just quote phrases from things like that.
Yep. How about Shakespeare? If you have heard Shakespeare in the original, you know that it comes in a kind of meter. I will give you an example here in 1 second. Take over, Nora, please. I should have had all of this prepared, but we've been busy.
Scott, did you have something you wanted to say? Yes, iambic pentameter suggests children's rhymes. Yes, I mean often those are in rhythm and rhyme, so to speak. Any other examples you guys can think of, or even lines that come to mind that you might be willing to share? You just suggest limericks and haikus. None in particular
Yes.
come to mind, yes. But
It was the
nonetheless,
pig fair last September, a day I well remember. I was walking up and down with drunken pride when my knees began to shudder and I lay down in the gutter and a pig came up and lay down by my side. As I laid there in the gutter, thinking thoughts I could not utter, I thought I heard a passing lady say, "You can tell the man who boozes by the company that he chooses." And with that, the pig got up and walked away. I got that limerick from Cathal McConnell, who was the flautist with a great Irish group back in the 60s and 70s, sitting in the dark in the Great American Music Hall in between their performances. They, for whatever reason, the fact that we had beautiful women at the table, probably, they came up and sat at our table during the break. And he gave me that limerick, and I have remembered it for 40 years.
great
That's a
example.
good example, yes. So other examples.
I, unfortunately for us all, can't remember any Nantucket limericks.
Probably not get it, probably keep us from trouble. So, I was able to find this in the original because a lot of Shakespeare has been rewritten to be more in line with modern English. So, one of my favorite scenes, for reasons that will become apparent, this is the duel between Mercutio, Romeo, and Tebow, or Thibault, as they often say, but it should be pronounced Tebow. So, Mercutio and Tebow got into it, and Romeo tried to break it up, but in doing so, he allowed Tebow to get a hit on Mercutio, and the hit is bad. And Tebow runs off. And Mercutio is asked how it is, and he says, "No, 'tis not so deep as a well, nor as wide as a church door, but 'tis enough, 'twill serve. Ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man. I am peppered, I warrant, for this world, a plague o' both your houses. Zounds, a dog, a rat, a mouse, a cat, to scratch a man to death, a braggart, a rogue, a villain that fights by the book of arithmetic. Why the devil come between you us? I was hurt under your arm." Now think about that. Think about how that was written. You notice that there is rhyme and meter to it. And the reason for this is because most of the actors at the time were illiterate. They couldn't read a script and memorize it. They had to hear it and memorize it. So the story was given with a meter and with parallels. We see the parallels in a dog, a cat, a rat, all of that sort of thing.
Parallel structure, yeah.
Parallel structure. We were
You're
just listening
repeating
about that.
phrases, and they really
Yes.
stick in the mind that way. Yeah. So we have a couple great suggestions.
Yes.
Levita has been, she mentioned ballads,
Yes.
yes. And we've had some great modern ones from Billy Joel, she mentions, and John Denver. Man, I love John Denver. She mentioned specifically The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which is
Oh,
a
yes.
ballad
Yeah. A ballad
about
about a ship that went down in Lake Superior in the 1960s.
a Celtic flair.
Yep. Um, the poetry of Dylan Thomas is another one where you find it. If you listen to any of his poetry being recited, which is the best way to hear it. Like his poem, Death Shall Have No Dominion. That line appears over and over again in the poem to drive it, to drive the meaning of the poem home. So, in order to craft the kind of story that changes people, you have to be able to tell it in a particular way. And so I'm going to pull up the Enneagram that we have for this, and we're going to use that to understand. Now I'm going to pull it up if I can find it. There we go. I somehow made it disappear. We're all discombobulated today. Don't mind us. Let me know when everybody can see this.
Thumbs up if you can see it. Good. Okay, it's working.
So this is the Enneagram of spoken story, and this is different than if you had written a story. And we've talked about story in general, and there will be a link at the end of this video to our Enneagram of the Hero's Journey, which is one way to craft a story. This is another way, and this is more community oriented. This is about the storyteller and the community. The bard and his tribe. And so what we have here is the entering shock, which is the collective story is out of balance. Now, what does that mean, the collective story? Everybody, every group, every people have a story. They have the metaphor of who they are. So this group has the story of the nine-sided circle. Even though we might not exactly know what it is. One day soon, Noor and I might tell you the story of the nine-sided circle.
Could happen.
Could happen. As a matter of fact, let's make that happen. We won't do it tonight because we need to practice some. But maybe next week we will do the story of the nine-sided circle, the ballad of the nine-sided circle. So, every group has a story. Here you are, you're hanging out with your tribe, and something is off because the thing about balance is that sometimes you're out of it. Things will knock you one direction or another. And when that happens, it is the job of the storyteller to craft a story that speaks to the community and restores balance. We see this, one of the best examples from Native American tradition is the Navajo people. All of their ceremonies are based around elements of their story as a people, of their creation story, of who they are. So after World War II, lots of Navajos fought in World War II. And they came back, and a whole bunch of them had PTSD. They didn't know that that's what it was at the time, but they had it. And so the medicine men of the tribe, the singers, they're actually called singers. Hatali means one who sings. They revived an old ceremony that's called the enemy way, which was used when Navajo men had to go out on raids and they had violent contact with an enemy. And when they returned, they were put through this ceremony and it rebalanced them. And so the enemy way takes elements from their creation story and over a period of days brings the person or people who are being treated through that pattern of the story themselves so that they relive the story. And at the end of it, they're brought back into balance and they no longer have PTSD. And wonder of wonders, it worked better than any of the white man's medicine for fixing these folks, because it was a way for them to be reintegrated into their community after having been moved out of balance by violent contact with some other group. So does that make sense to you how that works? So the collective story gets out of balance. The storyteller, who is the bee in the center, and by the way, for those of you who may be wondering, that is a bee. It's the Egyptian depiction of the bee and is used in their hieroglyphic and is actually pronounced bee in Egyptian, so they say. That bee in the center is the storyteller. And they're going to use both the circle and the moving lines and the triangle to craft their story. So, at the 0 point, the entry point, you understand that the story is out of balance. Now, the storyteller also has an innate understanding of what being in balance is. You can't be a good storyteller unless you can access the state of balance yourself. And so, from that innate understanding, one begins to gather the elements needed for the story. Then we choose the patterns of the story. Every story has a pattern, and there are a finite number of patterns. The most classic example in the West is the hero's journey. The hero's journey is a pattern. So the story can take on the hero's journey pattern. There are a number of other patterns within the story, and some people can argue all stories are the hero's journey. I don't care. Trust me, there is more than one pattern. And for instance, the heroine's journey, which is close to the hero's journey, is different than the hero's journey in several ways. Sometime we may have to think about that because women need equal time in this.
Well, not only that, but it's a story that, just as the hero's journey, it's not about the gender. It's just a different type of experience
Yeah,
that
and it's
anyone can
usually
have. Yeah.
related to gender. Not anyone can have it because oftentimes with the heroine's journey, you have to have a baby.
Yeah, so we'll check that out.
Yeah.
We'll be following up on that.
So, at point 2, you're choosing the patterns of the story. Which pattern will the story follow? And you will know those patterns like the back of your hand. Point 3 is the first shock, and it is exerting the will and energy to capture the attention of listeners. Think about it. Here you are the Prophet Muhammad, and you've just been given this incredible story to tell your people. If you just like sit in front of your house and go, I know a story. Hey, everybody, I know a story. There's a story. I know a story. Nothing happens. You have to go out into the center of Mecca and insist that people pay attention to you. So you have to capture the attention. And there are particular skills involved in each of these things. We see this in a lot of the old English ballads. There's a class of ballad called the Come Ye ballads. Come all ye young gentlemen, hear my sad story. And if it's said correctly, it captures people's attention. It's like, oh, there's a sad story. Come all ye young maidens and hear my fell warning. That's another one. Once you've captured your attention, you start the story by establishing the rhythms and patterns of the story. Rhythm is how you speak it. Pattern is the elements that you put within the speech. So the Kalevala is written in an 11-beat meter, I think. And that's what they use for Hiawatha. Da 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 da. There's your rhythm. And you put the pattern in with the rhythm. So this is where you will get come people and hear this story. I have a story to tell. There is a story of a fair maiden who in this town did dwell. There's an example of a simple pattern that uses a repetition mode to get people focused on, oh, there's a story. Once you get there, once you establish this pattern, you can cross the equator. And that means the story is going to happen and you can't untell the story. And we get to a very important part. And at point 5, this is the hardest work, which is to engage the senses within the story. Engaging the senses, especially the visual sense, is extremely important in oral storytelling. Now, some people say, I can't visualize. Doesn't matter. If I say, this young maiden who lived by the brook wore a red dress whenever she cooked. Y'all know what a red dress is. There will be a flash of that. So, engaging the senses, vision first. Auditory is taken care of because they're listening to the sound of your words and they're hearing the rhythm of your speech. And your speech doesn't have to rhyme, it has to have rhythm. So when I speak to you, I'm speaking to you as if I were singing a song. Now, some poetry doesn't have rhymes. Haiku is an example. I think, Board, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't traditional Scandinavian Nordic poetry, it has rhythm but not rhyme?
I think it has elements of both. And this was one of the characteristics of the tradition.
Yeah, and this was in the old Nordic tradition, this was a main transmitter of information throughout the entire community, was these beautiful stories that they told. And you can get those stories in books from Board, from his publishing house. So the work of engaging the senses is very important. And that is a matter of repetition again, of parallels. She wore a dress of red. It was red like a fire. It was red like a sunset. It was red as in the blood of a wounded man. You see how those parallels fit in to make this a visually potent story? Yes, no, maybe? Now, when you have achieved this engaging of the senses, then we can get to the sixth shock. The listeners surrender to the story. They become the story. They embody the story. They live the story through their own imagination. and they go through the same steps that the protagonist in the story goes through. It literally repatterns them in a particular way, and they accept the solution to the imbalance if they do this correctly, which is our point 7, the transfer of the pattern of the story to the community, which says we were out of balance and now we can move back into balance because we have this new pattern to the story. The story has been adjusted. It has been tuned like a guitar string, so it's now in proper pitch again. The community adjusts to the healed pattern at 8. That means they start living it rather than just thinking about it. They act out the solution to the story. And at 9, the story is in balance and the community thrives. And that's our exiting shock. So that's the pattern in a circular manner. Now we need the moving lines here. First, we need the shock points. Do your shock points first. What's wrong, or what is the entering shock? In this case, what's wrong with the collective story? And to find that, you have to go out and listen to people. You listen to your community, and they will tell you where the story is out of balance. 100% of the time, even if they don't consciously know. Because in their own narratives, that will come out. The 3 shock, being able to exert your will and energy to capture the attention of the listeners is a matter of charisma. It is a matter of being able to literally capture the attention of the people around you, because if people don't listen to your story is worthless. The 6 shock, getting the listeners to surrender the story and to the story and enter into it. It's a literal surrender. It's giving up what you've been holding on to so that you can move into something else. Then we look at the moving lines. And I'm going fast because I'm assuming that, well, I know all of you here have studied enough Enneagram that you can follow the pattern of this. And for those of you who can't, I will put some links at the end of this video. You're going to have to watch all the way to the end to get it, so that you can understand how the Enneagram works, or one of the ways that the Enneagram works, because the Enneagram can work in a lot of different ways. But one of them is how this process works. So, the storyteller at point 1 is gathering the elements needed for the story. One of the things that they do is they look down to 4 and go, what are the rhythms and patterns I need for this story? Because that determines the elements. If you need to tell a story of a red dress, which is like the color of blood, you don't necessarily need blue skies. That might be a superfluous element. And then you also have to look back to 7. The idea that this story is going to have to transfer its pattern to the community. So in gathering the elements for the story, you have to understand that there is a pattern that is going to need to work here. This is the art of the story more than anything else. And at 2, again, choosing the pattern for the story, you have to look to 4 and go, what are the rhythms and patterns that I need? And to understand that, you have to look back to 8 and go, oh, the community needs to adjust to these new patterns. So what's going to work for them? If it's a fishing village, you don't want to use patterns around rock climbing. You're probably going to want to use patterns around being on the lake or being out at sea. Not necessarily fishing, but that can often work. We move to 5, engage the senses. What do we need to know about engaging the senses? It has to transfer the pattern of the story to the community, and the community has to be willing to use that pattern to adjust itself. So anytime you are working on engaging the senses, it has to have these two things in mind. How do I pattern this? Then at 7, pattern transfers. We look back and go, okay, the senses were engaged correctly, so the pattern is easily transferred. And we look forward to 1, and we realize that these patterns create new elements that return to the repository of storytelling elements. This is the basic pattern of how you tell a verbal story, how you sit in a circle of people and you tell them a story that works for them to create change. Sometimes you will do this to music. You know, we look, again, let's use the Celtic and Nordic peoples as an example. Both of them use music to accompany their story. The Skalds used a lyre, as I remember, or lyre-like instrument that actually has a beautiful sound to it, and can accompany you on to set the rhythm of the story. God, I can't remember his name. There is a guy who recites Beowulf in the original Old Anglo-Saxon, accompanying himself on an Anglo-Saxon lyre. And it's an amazing experience, even if you don't understand a word that he's saying. Just listening to the pattern of the story is powerful. I'll see if I can find a link for that at some place.
I'll make a note.
Good note, yeah. So, there you have it in a nutshell. Like I said, this talk presupposes that you have some background in the Enneagram. And if you don't, then I will make sure that there are links to our playlist of all of our Enneagram teaching videos, and you can learn about the Enneagram enough to understand this. So let me get rid of this. And what do you think?
Scott says, I would love to know more about different story pattern options.
Okay, so as I mentioned, the one that we all know about is the hero's journey. And that gives you a particular pattern. The heroine's journey is...
There are a couple of different takes on it, to be honest.
Yeah, there are. One of which involves birth, another of which involves death. The heroine's journey can be the journey of a midwife. And midwifing goes two ways, bringing people into the world and easing people out of the world. A classic example of this is Terry Pratchett, the novelist, uses a pattern in his story about his witches that is part of it. I would not even call that the heroine's journey. I would call that the healer's journey. The healer's journey follows particular patterns, and one of the patterns is to be outside of the community in such a way that you can see the problems of the community. And that brings us to the clown's journey. The clown's journey is a very particular one. May have to do that one as a talk sometime too, because it's a powerful one. The clown is wounded in some way at the beginning of the journey. He is healed by a clown. He's healed by a chaotic figure that operates outside of the set rules of society. In order for the healing to work, the wounded individual has to become a clown themselves. They have to accept their role as outside of the pattern, but in the way that reinforces the pattern. For those of you who are interested in more of this, we did a talk some time ago on the clown, the Harlequin, the Joker.
Sacred clowns, yeah.
Sacred clowns, yes. So the sacred clown is one who is brought into chaos, but from chaos creates order. And their journey is a very, very powerful one. And I think that will, at some time in the not too distant future, deserve a talk on the Enneagram of the sacred clown as a story pattern.
So we have a question.
Yes.
Board asks, how would you describe the character of Loki? It seems like he's both brought into chaos, but also a generator of chaos.
Yeah. I have to say, I loved the character of Loki. He was always one of my favorites when I was reading the Norse myths, even though he got a bad rap at the end. For those of you who don't know, Loki was the adopted son of Odin, but he was a Jotun, a giant. Giants don't necessarily mean incredibly tall, they just mean of a different but related species. And he was the archetypal trickster god. He did things that were incredibly stupid sometimes. He did things that were incredibly helpful sometimes. And in the end, because Nordic mythology tends to be pretty grim, he ends up getting screwed, and he ends up being on the wrong side at the end of the world. But I think that was added on later. Loki, his first cousin was Coyote. Coyote is one of the archetypal trickster beings of the Native American world. And he is both good and bad. He brings fire to men, and then he does stupid shit that gets him killed over and over and over again. The thing about Coyote is that he's always getting killed. He just comes back a lot. There's a great example of what should be Loki, or what could be Loki in the series American Gods, not the book, but the TV show. This Irish woman is talking to a leprechaun at the end of her life, and she says to him, "I wanted to thank you for all the goodness that you bring." He says, we're like the wind, we blow good and bad. And that's Loki.
His character is quite interesting also, that he is not, I'm not sure if he is pure Jotun, and he's definitely not pure God. So he's sort of like in neither camp.
Yes.
And he seems to cause a lot of issues for the gods. But at the same time, it's like he was there from the beginning, he's there at the end, and he's integral to the destiny of the universe, even if they can't see it all the time.
Yeah, and I think that is a really good it's an excellent take on him, because in many ways, Loki fulfills the trickster's role of being in balance, of bringing things back into balance through his chaos. Even when his chaos creates harm, like he plays a trick and Baldur ends up dead. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but a certain amount of balance came out of that trick.
It speaks to things not always having the consequences or the effects we would expect to.
Yeah. And sometimes we don't understand the consequences.
Exactly, yes.
But it's interesting to see this in the perspective of mechanical behavior, because that trick, that prank, if you will, it did trigger the events that would lead to the end of the world.
Yep.
And it was like they all knew, in a sense, even when they brought the Fenris wolf into their midst, they knew that this would be the outcome that was latent in the universe. But at the same time, they kept playing along sort of with the machinations of destiny, and there was no way they could stop it.
Yep. And that is an important part of it, is that in some ways, the fate of humanity and the gods was completely mechanical within the Nordic myth structure. The Norns worked it out in the beginning and it went to the end. But people like Loki would interrupt that fate from time to time. I mean, we have to remember that the Fenris wolf and Hel herself were children of Loki.
You could maybe call Loki a shock point.
Oh, Loki was always your shock point, and that is one of the essential points of the clown's journey, is that the clown is a walking shock point.
It's a very important thing to remember.
Yeah, something new entering in from the outside. So those are some examples of different story patterns that might be used. Obviously, I'm very fond of the clown pattern.
So I see that David and Jonathan have been unmuted.
Okay,
I'm sure you guys
Jonathan,
have things you'd like to say.
David, tell us stuff.
Yes, I wanted to answer this question of why we might use a story to correct the community problem versus saying it directly. And I wanted to give an example. Like, I feel that in the US, our community has a problem with our children. The children seem to be losing their enthusiasm for life, and they're losing their enthusiasm for discovery and for play. And when I say it like that, it's too intense. It's people don't want to hear that. So I'm thinking, well, how could that be told in a story? And the story that comes to mind is that the Pied Piper of Hamline.
I was just thinking of that very story myself.
A very common story where there was a problem with rats in the community. The real problem was with the children. Though it appeared like the rats were the problem, and all the emphasis were put on trying to eliminate the rats instead of concentrating on the true problem. The rats in that story could represent, we're telling our children, stranger danger, don't go out of your house. Safety is the most important. Political correctness, don't offend people, don't insult people. And in our attempt to cure the problem of the rats, we're losing our children.
Yeah, and you have the basic pattern of that now. You could craft a story on the bones of the Pied Piper that would create that metaphor. And the thing is that If I come to you and I say, Jonathan, the way you're treating your kids is wrong, that ain't gonna work. But if I tell you a story that is not directly about your kids, but is isomorphic, you all know the term isomorphic, it means one-to-one with the problem that's going on and a solution to it, then you'll hear the story because it's not about you, except that it is. And the only way you can understand it is by making it about you. I remember an example of Milton Erickson, the great father of medical hypnosis, using a story about a tomato plant to ease the pain of somebody who was dying of cancer. And all he was doing is talking about a tomato plant, and the person's pain went away. And it's because the person identified with the tomato plant as them, which seems weird, but it worked. And that's the important thing. So in order for the stories to work, the listeners have to, as it's said in the Enneagram, become the story. And this works very, very differently between the spoken word and the written word. There are masters of the written word that suck at storytelling. It's weird to see. And there are masters of the spoken word that suck at writing stories. That's also weird to see. I would be one of the latter. I can tell a good story, but writing is just too damn slow.
You don't totally suck at it, though. That seems like an overstatement, but I understand what you mean. Yes, like they're different media, and they
Yeah.
take different processes, and they're different skills that one can master, and they don't necessarily overlap.
So, in order to find the story patterns, you need to expose yourself to stories. And you need to hold the idea that there is more than the hero's journey. The hero's journey is one story that lays upon the bones of the archetypal story. Some
I
would
think that,
argue that it's
sorry.
Go ahead. No.
No, I think that might actually be part of the problem, maybe in reference to what Jonathan was saying also, because we're so much exposed to hero stories now, if it's Marvel or whatever it is, and the hero becomes sort of like the cultural role model, but there is so many other patterns that we can look at to make life exciting, not just the hero's journey.
That is absolutely the truth. So, if you understand that the hero's journey is one pattern out of, let's say there's 100 different story patterns that you can use, you can begin finding them. And you find them ideally by, these days, you get the written words and you read them aloud, especially to your friends. Read them aloud and notice the effects on you, on them, on how things change as you listen to them. And you can do this in any language. This is not language limited. You can do it in Arabic, you can do it in German, you can do it in French, you can do it in Apache, doesn't matter. The bones of the stories are deeper than language. What was the first music? Any guesses?
A drum.
The drum is one good guess. It is either, and we don't know for sure because we weren't there, it is either the drum or the voice, probably a combination of the two. And not even words, but just humming. In traditional Native American music, mostly it has no words or very few words. It's all in what's called syllabic. Syllabic is just using small syllables strung together. And the classic is hey nay yo way. Doesn't mean anything, but you'll find it in hundreds of native songs. And so that just uses the pattern of voice as a rhythmic instrument. So transferring that to hitting something that makes a nice resonant sound, and using your voice to make a nice resonant sound. And that's the first music. And that goes on today. To this very day, that kind of music is happening. And you find it in powwows all the time. You know, most of the music that you hear has no words. It's just syllables matched to the beat of a drum. Native American church, it's the same thing. Peyote songs are syllables for the most part. Some of them have a few words to them, but they are matched to the beat of a particular kind of drum. This is primal to us. If you want to know how primal, get a group of people together, get them loosened up in some non-alcoholic way, and get a drum going and get people chanting to the drum without using words, and watch what happens. It's really interesting. Next thing you know, a bunch of them will be getting up and dancing around the fire. And those rhythmic structures are what makes stories more powerful. Aaron said something here. So.
We also got to touch base with David.
Yes,
but
David, you're so quiet. Tell
Yeah.
us. Speak to us.
So patient. That's what he was.
Yeah, I was wondering how many people are a community?
Start with two.
Yeah, that makes me think of a hadith, right?
Yeah.
About how it goes.
What's the hadith?
Oh, just like saying of Jesus. I don't know, but it's about like, you know, where there are two or where there are three.
Yeah, one of my favorite of those hadiths, which goes to community, is the Prophet Muhammad said that the food of one person is enough for two. The food of two is enough for three. So you have food as a community builder right there. And what do you do while you're eating? While you're sitting around and eating? You tell stories.
So it could be two. It's probably best for the purpose of, you know, that sense of sharedness if it's three.
Yeah.
Or more. Yep.
Yeah, I think the Jesus quote you were looking for was, if three or more are gathered together, I am with you, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Exactly. Yeah.
It's a good quote.
We take it as metaphor, then the I that is with you could be the spirit of the story. Well, I mean, you know what I mean. Energy of storyteller as a conveyor of healing energy could happen between two or three or more. When you have more people, it adds to that connective energy. All right. Yes. And Aaron says, there's more to a good story than the elements that you immediately identify with.
That's absolutely the case.
Yeah.
The heart of the good story is the elements that you don't consciously identify with, but you still take on in order to understand the story.
This is why we need lots of different storytellers too.
Yes. Yeah. And not everybody likes the same storyteller.
Very good questions. Does anybody have any others? Shall I start calling on people?
You should start calling on people. It's that time.
Great, Malou.
Yeah, I was wondering, Mushtaq, you said about some kind of story that is also told with music, that even the sound of the pattern is powerful, even if you don't understand the words.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering where that fits with the importance of understanding the words we say.
That's a special case because the power of that kind of story or that kind of music is in the rhythm itself, getting that rhythm in your body as opposed to actually changing meaning. It's at a different level. So the most powerful case of that is the story that is sung to a rhythm but still tells a story. Look at the old ballads. Some of my favorite. There is a Swedish ballad, and maybe the Norwegians have it too, called Hamline, which is a story about a Christian knight who meets a troll girl who has a crush on him, and she offers him all of these wonderful things if he will just marry her. And of course, being the asshole that he is, he goes, "I'm going to resist all of this, and I'm not going to marry you, and you're a troll," and all of that. Trolls can be very beautiful. Now, if he were a pagan, he would have known that if he had married this troll, he would have been exalted into a whole nother realm of being. He would have been given spiritual gifts that he could not find anywhere else. He would have become a great hero and probably died in battle, but that's a different thing. So this was a story that's interesting because it it's at a transition point between the pagan world and the Christian world of Scandinavia, where they're turning their backs on the old magic in hopes of finding the new. And it's best understood in Swedish. But it still works in English. And I would bet you that there's even a German version of it if you look around. Because the languages are close enough, the cultures are close enough.
Did you have anything you wanted to add, Malou?
Not really. I'm just still wondering. This is something I noticed that I listen to quite a lot of Arabic and Persian music right now, and there is a lot of story in it, I think, but I don't understand it. And sometimes I don't know, maybe they say things I really don't like or want to hear. Yeah.
Well, with Persian music, it's all about heartbreak. So there's one of my favorite Persian songs in the world is called Gole Sangya, which means mountain flower. And it's about somebody who climbs to the top of a mountain to talk to this little flower there because only this flower understands the heartbreak of separation being set up there by itself. It's a beautiful song. And it's a song that if you're playing music in an Iranian restaurant and you start singing this song, everybody comes out from the kitchen, wherever, and starts singing it with you, and people are crying. And it's just, yeah, it's one of those kinds of songs.
True story, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, Zainab and I have been working on that song a bit.
Yep. But yeah, the cure for this is to get translations of it, and so that you know what it's saying, and then you can hear the meaning in the music. Um, oh, Scott had to go. Probably the kids are. Scott's kids get rowdy about this time of day. Yeah,
Maybe
like
it's
Sweet Caroline.
Sweet Caroline.
Another thought I had is that in German music, there's a much more clearer storyline than in English music. I feel like I don't understand the what they say in the English songs, and then I realized that it's often just quite random words, and in German songs it's like it's a told story, and it's rhythmic and all of that, but it's much more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that goes back to the old traditions of the skalds. That's inherent within German culture, Germanic and Scandinavian culture for thousands of years, probably. Music tells stories, and I've noticed that too, even with modern German folk groups like Faun, that you find these cool stories in their songs.
Smaller. Great. How about Ailey? What are you thinking about this class, this session?
It's okay. I'm wondering, is there a difference between this pattern and neuro-linguistic programming?
Um, yes and no. Neurolinguistic programming comes out of the work of Milton Erickson mostly, and Erickson was a powerful storyteller. And so they have adopted that. David Gordon's book on therapeutic metaphor touches on parts of the pattern.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, no, I'm not wondering, but every politician starts with storytelling, isn't it? Just
Oh,
what is
yeah.
happening in Europe with Russia, how he starts the story about the how important Russia is and how it is led by the Orthodox Church, and to get the Russian along with him to join into the war, but it doesn't. They may not call it a war.
Yeah, it's funny. There's some redefining of patterns there.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, my Russian is non-existent, so I can't hear Putin talk in the original, and I distrust translations oftentimes. But I can use the example of Donald Trump, who used a lot of these patterns in his speeches, both storytelling and repetition and paralleling. You hear it in his speeches, and I've had this thing going for years where I have deconstructed the talks of politicians, especially presidential politicians, to see where the bullshit lies.
yeah,
And you know, Trump had almost no content, just evoking emotion. over and over and over again and getting the emotion to print on him. I should point out that it is well known that Trump studied with Tony Robbins for quite some time, and I suspect he picked up some patterns there.
Mhm. But and you mentioned Trump, and when he was the president, I listened often to him, and I hear he didn't sound sincere. It doesn't give good vibes at me. So I can feel how if someone is sincere with the storytell, I can feel it by heart. And if someone is just trying to hypnotize you, I can feel it also and hear the words or the pattern, how the other is using it.
But you're smart, and that means you were not Trump's core audience. Trump's core audience was people who can't do that, who they would be what Gurdjieff would call man number two. They're entirely stuck in their emotional centers, and
So
they
then,
don't.
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
they're
Norm.
projecting their emotions
Yeah.
onto what he's saying. And because they can identify with it, there's the illusion probably of sincerity.
Yeah, and I understand what you mean. His speeches are repellent to me. I get a visceral reaction of pushing away from it, just because of the manipulation involved. But his core audience, his base, loves that shit. They're getting dopamine hit after dopamine hit.
Yeah.
So, storytelling from the dark side of the force. And that can happen.
Ooh, okay. Bonnie says she needs to take off. It's so good to see you, though. Thanks for being
Yeah,
here.
thanks for coming.
That sucks. Baby accidentally got awakened. All right. Thank you, Ailey. Roland, how about you?
I really like the topic. It's very timely once again. I had a very cool experience when you brought up the Enneagram. It was almost like I was seeing it the first time in 3D and color, because I'm so much in that process right now that it really made tons of sense. And not that I didn't get it before, I thought, but I really got this very experiential sense of like, oh, okay, that's okay. Oh, and this goes here and it goes there. And like, oh, yeah. It all makes perfect sense now. And it's cool to, for me, really think about this, because I'm at this point too, I guess, where I'm thinking about what it is, like what to play, like what do I actually play? Is it stuff I like? Is it, you know? And this actually gives me some good questions, I guess, more precise questions to ask myself. Like,
Excellent.
like what does it, like what is it that it's needed? Like what do people need to hear, basically? What is the thing? And so it invites me to listen to what people are saying and what their story is and what I feel might be needed there. And that gives me a totally different sense of purpose, actually, in this whole endeavor of doing street music. And thanks for that. This is a really big deal for me.
Makes me happy. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I love it when a plan comes together.
Yay. Great.
Yeah, and that reminds me of another power of this kind of storytelling. And this is the way I'm explaining this comes right out of NLP, which is you can say anything to anybody in quotes and get away with it. So a lot of storytelling becomes saying in quotes. You can make your hero or your villain speak the words of the community. Do you understand what I mean? So I say, Noor, you know what I heard?
What did you
This
hear?
guy who I don't like at all had these terrible things to say about you. He said that you were a terrible, no good, very bad person, and your feet stink, and your mama dresses you funny. And I thought that that was the stupidest thing in the world.
Yeah, and then I'm thinking, wow, that guy's an asshole instead of
Yeah.
you're an
Instead of me
asshole.
being the
Yeah.
asshole. Yeah. And so you can say things in quotes in a story that people will not be willing to hear directly.
Excuse me. Yeah, so that's a great example of how to utilize storytelling as a way to perhaps speak truth to power.
Yep.
I mean, Scott was talking about that earlier, before we got the talk started. Because
Yeah.
speaking truth to power can be so dangerous, and yet we can find ways to make it safer. Storytelling is one of those ways.
Yep. And being a street musician in many, many ways is just being a storyteller with a cello.
So there you go. Good. Yay. All right.
Wael, what do you
Yes.
think?
Great minds. I was thinking we should talk to Wael next.
Many things. One of the first thing that comes to mind is what you said about each school, each tariqa having a craft. And you said that the crafts that our school have is that of storytelling. And I'm linking that to something that you said earlier when you said the craft of our school is also being people readers, the readers of people. And the part on the Enneagram, the 0.0, where you mentioned that, first of all, the B needs to know what balance is in order to create a story to rectify an imbalance that the storyteller sees. So am I correct in thinking that as people readers who know themselves what it's like to be stuck and unstuck in their own story, in their own self, are we as people readers selecting the right story for the people we are reading and trying to help be unstuck? Have I got that right?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because that's exactly correct. A good storyteller is reading their audience as they go, is watching the body language, is listening to murmurs, is looking at expressions, is all of these things as a guide to how to tell the story. And if you can't do that, you cannot reach the heights of storytelling.
Mhm.
So that's why those two things go together. If you cannot read people, you cannot tell a good story to them.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And yeah, some of this we'll talk about in private.
But that brings up a very good point about how that's what makes this a craft. That's what makes this an art, what makes it a skill set. And as I said, it can be learned and it can be practiced. And that means wherever you're starting, there's room for you to build a sense of, if desired, like a competency in this.
Yep.
Yep. Look, how about you?
I got nothing. I'm literally just listening and trying to absorb because my storytelling skills suck.
Ha! I don't believe that for a minute.
I don't believe that either.
I've been talking to you for years and you tell a great story.
Okay. I will take it. Thank you. It can always be improved. So I'm just listening.
That goes for all of us. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of just the last time we had one of these talks and you were talking with Sydney. You were telling her stories. And there were stories that made a difference. So that's something that you should remember. You maybe tell better stories than you think you do. Maybe somebody told you you didn't tell great stories because you didn't follow their pattern. So don't listen to those people. Only listen to me.
Okay. Okay. Yes, sir.
Aaron, I know that you are not able to come on camera, but if you have anything you'd like to share, does anybody have anything they want to add?
If not, then we're going to go to Brady Bunch mode and sign off.
In like 20 seconds or so.
Yeah.
All right. Just enjoying the excellent talk. Aw, thanks, Aaron. All right. So here we are in Brady Bunch mode.
Yep.
Yes. Thank you all for joining us. I hope the person who asked for this talk got some, juicy stuff out of this. Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully
Really
they'll make
appreciated
some
that.
comments below because obviously you started something, dude.
Yeah. So thank you very much to them and to all of you for being here and enriching this talk as you always do. Thank you so much. All right, so we can wave to each other and then we'll head out. Bye.
Bye,
Bye, everyone on
folks.
YouTube, everyone here. Take care.